All right, so today we're going to be doing some Alteryx work. I've given you some tasks to complete beforehand. If you've already completed those tasks, great. You can pay close attention to my storytelling. If you're still working on those tasks, you can pay half a year while you're finishing the important stuff. So I am a huge fan of Alteryx. As you all have heard me tell the stories, I used to work in IDEA a lot back when I was at KPMG. That was kind of my sweet spot. That was where my value was. Um, and I'm a little bit sad because a lot of the students in this particular classroom did not get the experience to go through IDEA back in auditing simply because of the network issues we were suffering. If you fell in that group, I apologize. This will be a little bit more of a bumpy transition, but the comparison is that basically it's they're tools that do similar things, but Alteryx does it so much more efficiently. It's so much so sweet and so beautiful in the way it works. You know, I realize that I'm using very flowery adjectives, but I can't tell you how much I would have loved to have had a program like Alteryx when I was working. So one of the problems we had with Alteryx, this has been the 5th year that we're going to be doing Alteryx. And the first year that we tried to do it, I had it installed on my computer and we tried to actually create it on the 10 zigs. We put it on the remote desktop and it crashed the remote desktop. So that did not work out well. Then we tried it again the second year, said, okay, we think we got it stabilized and we did it. And students got through half of an assignment and then it crashed again. Third year, we were a little bit more successful and we got through 2 whole assignments before the remote desktop crashed. Then last year, we actually signed up for something called Alteryx Cloud, which basically is a cloud-based solution for Alteryx. And I'm happy to say that last year, everything went swimmingly. Everything went beautifully. And this is where Alteryx is headed. It's going to be, this is the future of it. It's not going to be a standalone program, but it's going to be something that's a cloud software that's available to people who subscribe to it. So I think that this is going to be something that you will encounter in your work to varying degrees. Some of you may use it very frequently. Some of you may use it only marginally. Regardless, I think having experience in data analysis is really important. And this is our data analysis tool of choice for this particular course. So this is one that I really, really like. Hopefully you enjoy it too. So as I start moving through this, please, first of all, let me know if I do something that, if I need to repeat something. That being said, I am going to try to go through this slowly because I know that this is going to be, for most everybody, their first exposure to this tool. But it will seem like I'm going at a fairly rapid pace because we do have a lot to cover. If we fall too far behind, if people are struggling, then I may just say, all right, get caught up when you can and watch the video. I think everybody was able to maintain pace last year, but I'm not going to lag too far behind simply because there's a lot to cover in order to get ready for our assignment. So everybody should be at this page right here, and this is the home page for Alteryx. Now, I'm the administrator for our Alteryx work group. That's actually, well, I'm the primary administrator. Dr. Caden is also administrator because she does do some work in Alteryx. So we can actually see everything that you do on the Alteryx cloud. We have access to the entire library. I'm not going to work through every single one of your workflows. I'm not going to look through them and try to gauge the work. But if you run into a problem and need a solution, I can actually log in and get access to your workflow and see what you've done and make changes as necessary. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm never going to make changes to your workflow. I'll look at the workflow and I'll say, okay, I think I see the problem, and then give you the advice. But that's a very, very convenient solution to have, is that we don't have to just kind of show, like, here's what I did, and turn my laptop to me. I can actually see your workflows if there's a problem. That's really helpful remotely. We're going to be working from this particular window, but we do need to go to our primary window operation. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working through Designer Cloud. And you'll notice down here that there's a link to Designer Cloud. There's a couple ways to open this. You can go for the home window and click on Launch here. You can also go to these this square where there's got the looks like Derive Applications, and you'll have a Designer Cloud listed here. There are a lot of different Alteryx programs that can be used. We're only going to be interested in Cloud, so that's the only one I've given you access to. So go ahead and open Designer Cloud, and it should pop open a new window. And as you can see, I've already got a few workflows going. See my name's there, and then there's some other ones there for other students in the class. Once we start working through these, everybody's name will pop up there, and I'll have access to those. So the very first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating something called a workflow. And that's the Alteryx terminology for basically just a new basis of tasks. So you can think about it being the same as a workbook for Excel. whenever you're doing operations, you're going to set up a base of operations, so to speak. And this is where we're going to be creating that. And it's a little bit different because Alteryx is very heavily graphically user interface. So the tasks that you perform, you'll be using different symbols, and you'll see what that means here in just a second. It's one of the reasons I like it, because the symbols kind of explain what's happening in each of the tasks, as opposed to IDEA, where you had to go to the history and see, how did I create this particular query? And you had to see what tasks were run. You can tell a lot what's being done by just looking at the symbols that are being run. So let's go ahead and click on this new button right here, because we're going to create a new workflow. Now, one of the golden rules of documentation, and I'm going to be sharing you a lot of golden rules of data analytics. I'm going to be sharing a lot of these golden rules, is make sure you document everything. And the very first step to documentation is going to be name your workflow. By the way, this popped up, it should have popped up for you all as well. We're going to be operating in standard. Please make sure that you stay on standard over here, which is listed. For some reason, some students last year got stuck on Cloud Native. I'm not sure how it happened, how it defaulted there. Cloud Native actually has more processing power, but it also has fewer tools, and some of the tools that we will need will be in standard. So make sure you're set for standard. All right, so as I was saying, let's go ahead and click on our title up here, and we're just going to name this something basic, okay? I'm going to call this Alteryx Intro and 10-3. And I think I misspelled Alteryx. Trouble with getting old right there. Okay, so this is our workflow, and things will pop up as we start adding things to our workflow. But the very first thing we need before we can do any analysis is we need data. Now, there are a few ways that we can approach data. So we're going to start with the simplest data task. We're going to do what's called a manual upload of data. So here's what I want you to do. You're going to start seeing the things that I like about Alteryx. I want you to go over here and put your cursor over here where it says input data. Then I want you to click on it and then drag it to your workflow. And that's basically what we're going to do for the task. Now, I do want to make a quick note here. This is going to be relevant a little bit later on. It's not relevant right now. For some reason, the Alteryx Cloud platform likes to readjust everything to be centered. I like everything to be on the left. So if yours is adjusted and you just wanted to fix this, and you don't want to have to drag every single icon over, you can actually move your Alteryx Cloud platform by holding down, or your workflow, you can move it to the left or right by holding down Shift and then scrolling up or scrolling down. So that's kind of a neat little feature. That's not going to be relevant now, but it may be relevant later as we start adding icons to this. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to upload data. And if we use Excel or CSV files, comma separated values files, we can manually import data. So let's go ahead and let's upload data. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to navigate to where you save those files, which I saved my files on my Y drive. Oops, I'm in the wrong AIS course. There we go. That's the problem. And we're going to import instructor data. Now, a few quick notes about this. It should just default to importing all sheets, which is not a problem because we only have one sheet in this particular data set. And we're going to start the data on one. And instead of saying infer header, I would like you to go ahead and specify the first row field names. Now, will it probably pick up that anyway? Yes, it probably will determine the first row as headers, but let's just go ahead and remove all that and make sure that we import that. I have had some issues in the past with that. Also, I want you to click on this button where it says import raw data. And this is going to be something that you'll hear me talk about a lot. For those of you who remember me talking about this in IDEA, this was something that I was really, really insistent about. One of the best practices, one of the golden rules, one of the best practices of data analytics is to always start in a character format or a text format, and then you can adjust field types from there. And this is going to be something that's paramount that we want to make sure we start default Alteryx. They used to have a button on here that did this manually for us. To my knowledge, when we do the text imports, it will not do that. They've actually just defaulted to importing everything as character formats. Changing something from a character format to a different format is very easy. Changing something from an existing format back to a character format can be challenging, especially if you import numbers before. What we're going to see is we're going to have some examples of numbers that begin with a leading 0. If you import that as a number, what's the number going to read? It's going to read 0, or it's going to read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. It's just going to get rid of that 0 at the beginning. So that's why we want to import everything as characters. So let's go ahead and create that data set. It's going to take a second to import. More seconds than I expected. All right. So now we have our first data set listed here. And if once it imports, you should be able to see down here an example of the data. In fact, you should see the entire set of data. And you can tell that it imported everything as a character because it's got the letters A, B, C next to each field. Now we are going to make some transformations to that, and they're very easy to do, but I like to make sure that they start out that way because that's just an easy default to start from. Again, most data analytics programs try to interpret the data for you, and data analysts for a long time have said, import this as character first, because if we don't want it to be anything other than a character field, we can't switch it back easily. But if we start as a character field and then change it, that's an easy task to do. All right. So the next two files that I want you to import are not Excel or CSV files. And if we try to use that manual import, it will not work. The good news is that we can still import files. So let's go ahead and go back to this tab. It's this data tab over here. So we're in Alteryx 1. If you scroll up to the top, you will notice a button that says upload data. So let's go ahead and click on that button. And it's going to say drag and drop a file in here. And so we're going to do the same task, but we have to do it from this window here. We can't do this from the Alteryx workflow ourselves. So what I'd like you to do is I go to choose file, and you'll notice that once you've done that, that it actually gives you more file types available. It could actually import text fields. Now, in the past, especially when you use this for ID, you had to specify all the parameters in the file. Today, we're just going to click on student data, and it's going to import that automatically for us. And we don't really need to worry too much about anything. We don't need to make any adjustments. It actually recognizes that it's a pipe delimited. Does anybody remember from what the pipe symbol is? So if you look above your enter key, there's a vertical, like 2 dashes. That's a pipe. Yes.
Text files, so that files for it. Every time I click on it, it just like pops up a new window with like all the text.
So you should be able to save as. Yes. I will admit that's not a problem I encountered because I created the files natively. So let's just see if that's going to work. Okay, hold on a second.
You go to the text file, where all the text is on from, I press Control S to save it.
See, we learned something together as a collective. So did everybody hear what Clayton said? So if you need to save the text files, you can Control S in Chrome. Thank you very much, Clayton. You've solved a problem that I could not solve. I'm going to give you 1 point for that. Not point for the course. This is just a point just in general in life. This is a life point, okay? I don't know how you can redeem that, but you can tell people that you've got 1 extra life point, 1 more than everybody else.
I'm going to show you something last that point.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, never mind then. Never mind. I retract the life point. All right. So you may need to scroll down in your view because for some reason the Alteryx window view does not show, but we're going to create the data set here. Student data. We're going to do the same thing for the transaction data as well. So we're going to upload the data, and we're going to select the other data set. So we're going to import both of them. They're formatted exactly the same, pipe delimited. So we're just going to run through the same task, and it's pretty easy to do. We don't need to make any changes to any of the information here. We can just import as is. Now, you may notice here, especially in the transaction data, that it's trying to default to other field types. When we import, it should import everything cleanly as a string or as a string field, which is the Alteryx version of a character field. but it is trying to say this is the field types that we've identified that these should be. And to some degree, they're correct, but we're going to try to import them originally as just character fields, and we'll make the adjustments. Because like I said, if we don't import them correctly the first time, then we have to go back and do the imports all over again. All right. So we've got two new files. We've got student data and transaction data that should have just been pretty easy imports. Alteryx handles that import pretty straightforward for us. So let's go ahead and move back to our workflow. I'm going to make this a little bit larger because I had to zoom. Oops. By the way, you can also make the workflow smaller or larger by putting your cursor over the workflow, holding Control, and doing your wheel key. Remember, you do Shift if you want to move the workflow right to left, and you can change the size by hitting Control. But let's just leave it right there. All right, so let's go ahead, drag another input tool. And now for this one, you'll notice that our two new files that we just imported should be listed over here. We're just going to go ahead and click on student data for our second file. And that's all there is to it. And you will notice, and please let me know if yours is different, these are all listed as character fields natively. Now, why is this important? Look at ID field. Remember the ID field I was telling you about? That's one of those numeric fields we don't want to actually list it as a number, because if it lists as a number, it's going to be 1, 2, 3. Now, are there ways to correct it? Yes. Are those ways painful and tedious? Yes. Okay. So we'd rather just import it that way. All right. Let's go ahead and drag another input tool down. I'm going to move my window down a little bit. I want to stack these on top of one another. And we're just going to do the same thing for transaction data. And it should scan, everything should be imported as a string field. By the way, you can tell what the view looks like. If we go over here, this is the data view. This is what the data looks like in a tabular format. If we click on this button called metadata view, it will tell us the information about the file. So metadata is basically a fancy term for data about data. And it says everything is listed as a string field. And string, as I mentioned earlier, string is just our default term for a text field in Alteryx. We want everything to import as a text field if possible. All right, everybody feeling good about their imports? So let's check some information before we move on. Let's make sure that we have data integrity. So what you can do is you can click on the little arrows next to the data, and it will show you the previews down here. What we want is we want to make sure we have 6 total rows in our first file along with 3 total columns. So 6 total rows, 3 of 3 columns. The second file, we want 37 total rows and three columns there as well. And the final file, remember I told you that it was going to scroll over? Yeah, 222 rows, 4 columns. So I don't want you over there. I want you back over here to the left. So I got plenty of stuff to put on the right. Okay. So the next step that we need to know what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? What is our goal going to be? And the answer is that we're going to do something called data validation. Does everybody remember ETL back from AIS? So first of all, how long does the ETL process usually take, the data cleaning process? Yeah, it's 50 to 90%. Now, the good news is that I've limited the amount of ETL work that we're going to be doing, but we still need to do some work. So if you click on this file called sample data control totals, we need to actually check our data against this. This is a pretty common practice for any organization that does work for another organization. They will data work for another organization. They will say, all right, make sure you send me control totals so I can make sure that the database I have is correct. The data set I have is correct. Now, the transaction data is going to be pretty straightforward because we do have an amount field. But something we need to note here is there's something called hash totals. A hash total is just a fancy term for taking a numeric field that is not presented numerically and summing it together. So what does that mean? Let's go back to our example files. So in the student data, remember we had that student ID field or ID field 01. That is not a numeric, or that's not a quantitative field. We would not add IDs together normally. But we can create this, turn this into a numeric field so that we can use this as a numeric field for integrity purposes, which is what we're going to do. So we're going to change all of our fields that we need to change into numeric fields while retaining the integrity of the other fields. So let's go ahead and do this for our first file, which is going to be our instructor data. I'd like you to scroll down, and I want you to find something called the select tool, which outside of the input tool is probably the most common tool that you will use in Alteryx analysis. Let's go ahead and just drag it, and I want you to go ahead and put it right next to your first data set. And if you set it up right, there should be a dashed line, which is going to create a connection between those two files. Pretty cool, huh? So all we're going to do for this one is we're going to change our instructor ID field from a string field to an integer field. So instructor ID is going to be changed from a string field to an integer field. Now, remember I told you best practice is documentation. We need to make sure we document this process. So what I'd like for you to do is like you to right click on this symbol, the select symbol, go down to where it says add annotation. And I want you to just type in a brief description of what you just did. Convert ID to integer. You might want to copy and paste that for future purposes as well. All right. We're going to do that for the student data as well. So down here in student data, remember we've got our ID field down here as well. Let's just go ahead and do a little bit of a shortcut. There's multiple ways to perform the same task, just like there are in Excel. So click on these vertical ellipses right here next to ID. And you'll notice that there's a change data type field as well. Now, if you notice next to the change data type, there's a little symbol that looks like the select symbol. It's actually going to run the select task for us, but just for this one operation. It's going to do exactly what we just did, but it will do a shortcut. So we're going to highlight change data type and click on integer. There we go. It ran the select task for us. Again, we do need to document what we just did so we can track. If it sounds like I have traumatic experience about this, I remember working through IDEA databases and IDEA work, and somebody not naming their files and me trying to figure out exactly what happened when you got like 15 different trees and you're trying to figure out which tree is the one that you need to work with and nobody named anything. That's just why I'm so insistent about naming all of our tasks. All right, let's go down to transaction data. So transaction data, we're going to do a similar chore. We are going to do a couple of things though. So I'm going to go to select and drop down my select tool. Now we could change the instructor ID to a integer field if we wanted to. We don't really need to, simply because we're not going to be running our hash total instructor ID for this file. Instead, we're going to be running it on a mount field. Now, a mount field, even though all these numbers are whole numbers, what I'd like for you to do, just to get used to it, is I'd like you to change this to float. Now, what's the difference between integer and float? Well, integer, logically speaking, is an integer is a number. It's a whole number, all right? Float gives you the opportunity for decimal places. So amount fields would frequently have dollars and cents, which is why we want to get in the habit of doing that. It's not really going to change anything, but it does give us a better mathematical operation. So let's go ahead and add our annotation there. Change amount to float. All right. Before we do check our data, we're going to check our data integrity. We do need to do one last operation. So if you look here in the data that we've got now for the transaction data, we've got a date field, but does this look like an actual date field? No, it's currently listed as a date. Now, if we tried to change this over to date over here, it would give us an error because Alteryx cannot currently recognize this as a date format. It's easy to look at from our human view and say, okay, well, the first two numbers are month and the last two numbers are middle two numbers of days, the last four numbers a year. We can interpret that, but Alteryx can't natively do that. So what we need to do is we need to do a conversion for that particular field. So down here on parse, I'd like you to find the date time symbol, and we're just going to drag that and connect that here. Now, column to convert, we're just going to select our date column. And let's change the new column to transaction date. For lack of a better term. Now, here's the important part. Remember our format. It's going to say specifically incoming format and give you a big long list of formats. And you know what we're going to find is the format of our file doesn't match any of the existing formats. The reason why is because we're American and we do things really, really weird. Okay. We start with our months and then go to our dates. Has anybody ever thought about that? The listing of dates, month, date, it doesn't make any sense. It's because we're in the United States. So let's go and click on custom. And you need to actually add something called a mask, which is just the format for the date. So here's what I would like for you to enter. I would like for you to enter capital M, then lowercase d, d, and lowercase y, 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 y. And it's going to show you what the output should look like. Now, why did we specify uppercase MM? The reason is this is a date time conversion. Can anybody think of something in time that actually begins with the letter M? Minutes, yes. So if we put lowercase m, it'd be looking for minute conversions, not month. So we need to specify uppercase for month conversion. So you'll notice that we now have a transaction date down here, which makes things much easier because we can use that to track our activity. Okay, next step. This is one that Cloud has not got his act together as much as the old version. There was a very simple way that we could check this information in Cloud, but we can't do this, or sorry, in the old version of Alteryx, we can't do it the same way here. So we need to go through a little bit of a shortcut. So scroll down to the orange areas over here. And what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to pull this tool called Summarize. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be summarizing information so we can check it against our control totals. So remember we converted our instructor ID. I guess I need to draw this out a little bit because it's not, so convert our instructor ID to integer. We're going to do two things. We're going to click on instructor ID integer. That's not one of the things, but we need to click on the instructor ID to specify that field. And then we're going to go to add action and we're going to go to count. Then we're going to click on instructor ID again, and we're going to add action, and we're going to say sum. And what is it doing over here? It's basically going to count the number of instructor ID fields and then sum the data that's in the fields. So we have 6 instructor IDs, and the sum of that field together is 621. Now, why is that relevant? If you go back to your field check, the instructor data has 6 records with a hash total of 621. So that gives us assurance that we do have the right population of data. Again, we're going to add our annotation. I'm just going to say field check. And let's do that for the other 2 files as well. All right. So we're just going to pull that summarize tool again. Going to connect it to this one. And which field did we convert? We converted ID. So let's do the same thing for the ID field. Add action, count, click on ID, add action, sum. And then fix the fact that you put capital letter in the middle of your word because you're a CD and can't handle it if it stays that way. All right. We have 37 rows. The sum ID is 703, 37, 703. So that looks pretty good. Let's now do this for our final file. We're going to do this on the amount field. So count and sum. 222, 2401. 222, 2401. So the good news is, looks like we've got full file integrity, but there is one more thing that we need to consider. One more thing that we need to consider. So I do have a summarization on this entire file. Let's go ahead and drop that down just a little bit, pull that down. You will notice that in your field check that there's also a date restriction, and we want to leave a date restriction to the month of September. So it says if we have month of September, it's 159 records. Currently, we have all of our transactions. So what we need to do is we need to further filter this file a little bit by removing all non-September transactions. Funnily enough, we're going to be using something called the filter tool. So it's in the blue area. Just pull the filter tool, and you will need to connect this to the date time tool. So for the column, we're going to select transaction date. For the operator, technically speaking, this file does not contain any transactions after the month of September, but for your purposes, because this is going to be relevant for what you're going to be doing for your assignment, let's go ahead and use the operator as range. And this gives us the specification to start on September 1st and end on September 30th. Now, if we wanted to, we could type this in manually down here, but it's a lot easier just to use the filter options that are up here. So operator range and the start date, September 1st through September 30th. And we have a clue that we're doing pretty well because we got 159 rows in our condition. Also, I want to make a note of this. Got the letters T and F up here. What do you think those stand for? True and false, okay? The true condition is ones that meet our range of September. If we click on the F, it will tell us everything that's outside of the month of September, which is 63 rows down here. But we're interested in the true condition. We do still have to make sure that we have full field integrity. So let's go ahead and go back down to that summarize tool. Go ahead and connect that. Getting annoyed with the fact that it keeps scrolling over to the left, right. And we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. We're going to select amount, count, amount, sum. So 159 records, $1,659. Let's just go ahead and add annotation. This is probably a really bad annotation, but I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head. Should have been something a little bit more about summarizing by the field, by amount, and or by count and sum, and something like that. All records, but you know, it is what it is. We're running out of time, so the good news is we have all our records. That's basically our data validation check. We cleaned everything up. We put it into a format that we can use it for. We validated all of our data. We do have one more thing that I'd like to do. This is not directly relevant to the task that we're going to be running for this data set, but it's something you will need to be able to do for your assignment. So let's go ahead and take a look at our transaction data. Let's go all the way back here to this transaction data file, the original input. You will notice that one of the fields in here is called the student ID field. And it looks like it's just Mac 23, Mac 12, whatever. It's got the list of the students and some sort of say Masters of Accountancy and then some arbitrary ID assignment. If you click on the student ID or student data file, which is the one right above that, you will notice that we've got program, which is Mac, Masters of Accountancy, and an ID, but we don't have a combined field, which creates problems because if we want to compare those files, those two different data files, we're not going to be able to match those across fields. Now, how would you solve this problem in Excel? Just concatenate. Yeah, concatenate the fields. All right. We're going to do something very similar. Now, the good news is, so I do want to make a note here because this always comes up. What you're going to be doing for your assignment is you're going to be preparing files for joining, which is basically combining files together. You will not need to combine the files until a few weeks from now when we do Alteryx 2, okay? But this preparation task is really, really important. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back up here to a tool called Formula. Now, this is going to be weird. I want you to put the Formula tool out here, not connected to anything. What I want to do is we're going to create a manual connection from this student data file. So we're going to click on this anchor right here. That's what these are called, by the way, those little gray things. Click on that, and we're going to manually connect it to the Formula tool. And you can tell that there's a connection there. Now, part of the reason we do not want to connect this to the summary tool is because, first of all, the summary tool is going to have summarized data. But even if we connected to this field, the only reason that we converted the ID field was for the purposes of field integrity checks. What we want is we want our original data. So let's go ahead and let's create a new column. We're going to create a column called student ID. And just like we do in concatenate, we're going to put stuff together. It's actually easier in concatenate. Remember, the two fields that we need to join together are program and ID. So I'd like you to start typing the word program. And you'll notice that when you get to PROG, it lists a field for you. So this is the only one that meets those parameters. So we can click on that. Then click plus, hit plus, or type plus, I should say, not click, but type plus. Then type ID. And we're going to select the ID field. That's all there is to it. This note came up last year, just as a quick note. If we wanted to add spaces in between, like say we were trying to match names, if I wanted to put Michael space Barnes, I could do the same thing I do for concatenate, is I could just add quote space quote as well in here. The same task holds up. But now you can see we've got a student ID field, which now if I want to compare this file and this file, I can do so because I have a field that's common. All right, any questions on anything that we ran through? Yes.
So if we make a formula like that, are we making it, like, is it telling us to make a separate data set, or is that changing the original?
So all of the data sets retain their original integrity. Every time that you run a task, it creates a new data set. Yeah, so this formula right here, this anchor on this is a separate data set from this over here. We can still access the data over here in this file, and we can access the separate data set in this file right here. That's one of the nice things about this analytics tool. Same thing for IDEA, is that it retains the integrity of the original files. It doesn't change the base file information. All right, let's talk about your assignment. So the good news is for your assignment, basically what you're going to be doing is replicating the kind of tasks that we did before. There's a little bit of a narrative here. You're going to be doing a series of tasks for Bulldog Business Products. And this is a two-part task. The second part's going to take place in week 10. So we got a few weeks before we get to it. You do have 2 weeks to complete this assignment, but because we have a short week next week. I give you a lot of clues about what you will need to do, but it's basically a replication of the type of steps we do have to work through here. The thing that I want to caution you about is that you have to be very, very diligent to make sure you follow the tasks precisely. If you do not follow the task precisely and you kind of say, well, this is good enough, we're going to be running queries on this information for our next set of tasks. Remember the queries that we did in IDEA? For those of you who did IDEA, the queries is just ask a question of data. When you did the question of data, we're going to be doing the same thing for Alteryx. If your data set is not correct, you will not be able to run those queries, which creates a problem, okay? So this is a really important part. That's why we have these validation tools down here. So all the information that you need to validate that you've got the correct data set is listed down here. Your submission will actually just be a field captures of the summarize tool along with the workflow itself to show me that you put everything together correctly. So we don't really have time for you to get started on this, but the good news is that we do have a couple of weeks to finish this assignment, and we won't even be starting the new Alteryx assignment until week 10. So we've got a little bit of time to ruminate. I would make sure that you're apprised of this. I do want to make a note that the next quiz that we have does not occur until week 10, because week 8 next week, we've got fall break. Week 9, we're going to be out on Wednesday because of FBLA day. So we're not going to be doing Alteryx or the quiz on that following Friday. So we got a few weeks before our next quiz. But these questions about Alteryx from today will be on that quiz. So I know that's unfair, but it's a little bit like an exam. I guess you have to go back and refresh yourself on this. So please make sure you stay up to date on that. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a good weekend.